Welcome to Regulatory Ramblings. Our podcast today is brought to you by the University of Hong Kong's RegTech Lab, the HKU SCF FinTech Academy, the Asia Global Institute, and HKU edX Professional Certificate in FinTech, with support from the university's Faculty of Law. I'm your host, Ajay Shamdasani. The topic for today's startup companies, specifically how conducive Hong Kong's ecosystem is for their inception, growth, and scaling up, legally, commercially, and policy-wise. In our initial segment, we'll be chatting with David Cameron, a veteran American lawyer based in the territory who advises startups on the challenges and pitfalls they face, at least in the earlier stages. We'll follow that up with a discussion of what can be done to form a body that offers genuine support and mentoring to up-and-coming businesses in Hong Kong, with Syed Musheer Ahmed, Managing Director of FinStep Asia, and a former regulator with the Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority in Dubai, as well as Joshua Chu, who will be joining him. Simply put, it's going to take both a public and private partnership. But first, have you ever asked what lawyers do other than opine and advise on rules and regs, alongside drafting and filing documents? Well, startups require more than that. They need lawyers who add value to businesses rather than being an annoying expense, constantly pointing out problems, especially in the context of venture capital-backed firms in Asia. What's needed for startups are lawyers that can wear multiple hats like trusted business advisor, guide, and in some cases, mentors and sounding boards. With that in mind, we turn to David Cameron, managing partner and founder of the David Cameron Law Office, or DCLO, an independent Hong Kong-based law firm offering international legal services. That in 2021, DCLO is qualified to act on both Hong Kong and New York legal matters. David has 16 years of experience in the Hong Kong market, including time spent at some of the biggest firms in the world, such as Linklaters and Allen Overy. DCLO is a corporate law firm offering advice and solutions on general corporate matters, capital raising, M&A, fund formation, and contract law. And with that, I'll turn over to David. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, AJ. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. So, what do you see as the legal and compliance challenges facing startups in this city?
Yeah, it's a good question to start with, AJ, and thank you again. I'm going to start off with a little bit of a counterintuitive point, and I'm happy to be challenged on this and have a discussion. In certain way, it's almost too easy to start a company here in Hong Kong. And what I mean by that is it's to get the corporate entity set up is you can do it yourself in a matter of hours. Hong Kong is very user friendly in that sense.
Right, your minimal bureaucratic rigmarole. Yeah.
Yes. So you have this kind of very low threshold for anyone who has a good idea and wants to start their own company. But then the question is, then what? Because how do you go from having started your company, quote unquote, to really scaling it up, getting from top line revenue 1 million to 10 million to 50 million. So, and that's really about the ecosystem and the support system to help companies beyond startup stage to grow. Because you don't want to get to the point where you're saying, okay, we need higher thresholds in Hong Kong to start a company. That's not the way to go. But I think we need to think about how to foster and encourage growth. And I'm happy to talk on the legal side in Hong Kong because we're great at starting companies, but I think we're a little bit falling behind in terms of actually helping them to grow and ultimately become unicorns. And we don't want to get into the situation as a city where we're known as a good place to start a company, but not to have them flourish. So on the legal side, I think it's difficult, and I'm very sympathetic to founders in terms of you've just started your company, and you say you have a budget of 100, you don't have any choice on 50, and then you only have 50 left in terms of what you can spend it on. But the things you want to spend it on are maybe 200 or 300. So it's a matter of making choices, and then on the legal front, it's a matter of seeing your legal spend as an investment rather than a cost. And to get things right from the beginning will help your business grow. So, if $1 spent in legal spend this year will save you $2 next year, or if you want to look at it the other way, investing early on in getting your company right from the beginning from a legal perspective will help it flourish, in the near and medium term. And I think that's what kind of Hong Kong needs to focus on in terms of getting them from startup to a proper size company.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because that segues into my next query. In that, okay, we're good at starting companies, but why aren't we good? I mean, we have all the world's major law firms assembled in this town, yet people are still grumbling about costs. And so why aren't we good about providing legal services at all segments, all price points in the market, with an eye towards cost containment? Economies of scale that we hear about when we, study economics as students, that about how the bigger you get, average costs go down. Maybe that applies to goods. It doesn't seem to apply to professional services. And beyond that, yeah, I mean, there is a question of how do you effectively serve as a lawyer for a startup when they don't have that much of a legal budget, and as you're saying, okay, fine, look at it as an investment, but sometimes those funds just aren't there to make that upfront investment. And I don't know if there's any way to get around that quandary other than don't be undercapitalized. That Hong Kong is a serious, expensive international business city, and starting a company here is no joke. And don't even think about it if you've got less than 10 million or 100 million or whatever it is relative to what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean that's the core issue, and I don't think we want to go there in terms of discouraging entrepreneurship, but I think we do lack certain support network or our ecosystem. Even though you have enormous financial institutions here, conglomerates, property developers, and it kind of goes into, just because I can speak to the legal side, it goes to the heart of my firm and the market positioning, because on one end of the spectrum, you have the very big US, UK law firms, right? They're not a good fit for the startups, or let's call them growth companies, startup slash growth companies. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the local firms who, their operating language is Cantonese, perfectly good firms. And somebody used this term the other day, which I think is quite appropriate, kind of street law, right? So get your local litigation done, get your conveyancing done. But in the middle, in terms of independent international law firms of a smaller size that are a good fit for startups, there's practically nothing. And that's in contrast to Australia, US, UK, where they have very robust, smaller sized legal market that can service kind of the startup industry. So, and that's for a lot of different reasons. There are barriers to entry, the transitory nature of Hong Kong. Seasoned international lawyers will go from one big shop to another, or they'll go home to their home jurisdiction. They won't start their own law firm, as I have done. So that's, you kind of take that is what it is, and then what can we do as a city to help bring legal services to these startups? So you have organizations like Cyberport, Science and Technology Park, which will give companies an office, which will give them some budget with strings attached. And they're very good also at introducing capital in terms of investors in these companies. But I see very little legal support in those type of areas. So I think that would be a good place to start in terms of bringing in lawyers. What are the common pitfalls of a startup? Helping them find, it's not easy, but helping them find law firms and lawyers that are set up to help the startup community.
It's interesting you point out that that support has been lacking. A recent article in the South China Morning Post entitled "Supporting Role: How Invest Hong Kong is Driving Hong Kong's Firms Towards Global Growth" by Peggy Sito and Julie Zhang noted that after a quarter of a century promoting Hong Kong as an investment destination, Invest Hong Kong is now taking on the role of advocate for Hong Kong companies in terms of overseas expansion. Uh, but I wonder if that might be a little too late, and that I mean Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, they figured this out a long time ago. I mean, it just seems disappointing that the government's risen to the occasion, but a little too late. But beyond legal considerations, I mean, what what mistakes do startups make? I mean, other than the obvious of running out of money before they can break gravity and really got momentum behind them and come of their own.
Yeah, and I saw that article too, AJ, and I wouldn't say necessarily too little, too late, but I would say they're missing, they're skipping quite a few steps in terms of you need to support the industry at home first before you start expanding abroad. So, I think I read that the unicorn per capita in Singapore is more than double than in Hong Kong. So, and it just shouldn't. There's no reason why it shouldn't be that. It should be that way in terms of Singapore beating us by more than double in terms of producing unicorns. But to your point, in terms of what are common pitfalls. So it's easy to start a company. You don't need to have gotten your business degree. You don't need to have saved up money so you have a rock solid balance sheet. So you're and then capital is um, is introduced through these different organizations. So you have companies that really need to stay focused, really need discipline. And on the legal side, it's kind of sitting down with a good lawyer who's the right fit and thinking about what your starting point for your documentation, right? Shareholders agreement is a very easy place to start. Your co-founders agreement in terms of mapping out the parameters between the different stakeholders and being able to think things through different permutations based on your business plan and what kind of rights you want to have. What are you willing to concede in order to get funding from a VC? What are you not? Because I see a lot of documentation that was done several years ago, and people just have painted themselves into a corner because somebody came in with money and they just had not sat down with legal counsel and thought through the different options and where this may lead them.
Let's turn back to what can be done to improve the city's ecosystem for startups. I mean, we've got Invest Hong Kong, we've got the Science Park, the Hong Kong Trade Development Council. I mean, all these bodies serve their purpose, or at least they serve some purpose. But again, the article points to this, though. I think they're really chasing international headlines when they're talking about helping them overseas. When, as you said, that more needs to be done to help them domestically in their nascent stages, because that's most crucial. As with children, education in the early part of life is critical. But I guess what I'm wondering is that there's no, and this is the critique that I've heard anecdotally for years, that there's no real agency offering genuine startup support. Now, part of that's capital, part of that's know-how, but a big part of it is ongoing mentoring. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. And it could be a new agency. It could be, refining the current agencies that we have in place, the ones you mentioned, and I think they're all very well intended and net positive and helping the industry. But I think, and it's not, it's pretty obvious. I think if they survey their clientele, the people who are already in Cyberport Science and Technology Park, I have a lot of clients there, and the feedback just from, again, my small sample is, it's great on the finance and capital side in terms of, because this is Hong Kong, so we're talking about investments, right? And but it's very light on the legal side. So everything is there. I mean, the good news, the bright side of things, to end, if we're running out of time with the glass half full, is all the infrastructure is there. And you can take what's existing and just supplement it with more real world advice. I've put my hand up and I've knocked on their doors because I have clients there. And again, I'm very sympathetic, and I have potential clients there in terms of their situation. So I'd be happy to come in and do a teach-in, right, a seminar. It's going to be one step at a time, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we kind of need to massage the emphasis. So yes, finance and investment is one part, but then there's operational, and tied into that is legal advice as well. I think somehow, and there are a lot of different ways to do it, somehow that focus needs to be rebalanced.
Any closing thoughts, David?
No, I think, if you're a startup out there, I'll just say congratulations. You've taken a fantastic step that a lot of others haven't. On the legal side, if you feel like your lawyer is a cost, I would encourage you to keep going until you find the right lawyer who feels like a business partner and who feels like he or she is supporting your business, and a good business partner, and not a bill that you are begrudgingly paying.
David Cameron, thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you, AJ. It's a pleasure to be here.
And we'll be right back. And we're back. We're continuing our discussion of what can be done to improve Hong Kong's startup ecosystem. What can be done to help up-and-coming companies reach their potential and possibly become the juggernauts of tomorrow? Perhaps it'll require a separate entity offering genuine startup support, something beyond Invest Hong Kong, Cyberport, Science Park, or the Hong Kong Trade Development Council. Earlier in this broadcast, I referred to a recent article published in the SCMP written by Peggy Sito and Julie Zhang on how Invest Hong Kong, after 25 years of attracting investment capital to the territory, is now helping local companies grow overseas. For example, the Evident Group, a operator of digital investment platforms for alternative assets and licensed by the local Securities and Futures Commission, formed a partnership with Zaan Bank, the UAE's first fully licensed digital bank. The collaboration provided the Dubai-based bank's clients with investment opportunities through Evident's tokenization technology and infrastructure, and Invest Hong Kong played a key role in that. Yet, is that enough when places like Singapore, Taiwan, and Israel long ago seem to have learned how to nurture and scale up startups to go global? Our guests today certainly think that an empowered, well-resourced, startup-centric body would be a good idea and require public and private partnership to make it happen. Joshua Chu is a prominent Hong Kong lawyer in all matters fintech and crypto and a prolific writer. His opinion and insights are much sought after by the local press and correspondents of major foreign news organizations operating in the city. You can often hear him at his most candid on RTHK on radio, and he's also the co-chair of the Hong Kong Web3 Association and legal advisor to the Hong Kong Blockchain Association, and he's a returning guest to our show. Joining him is Syed Musheer Ahmed of FinStep Asia, a firm he founded 6 years ago and of which he is also the managing director. Musheer has over 18 years of extensive experience as an ecosystem builder in the realms of capital markets, fintech, and virtual assets, including a decade as a global markets trader prior to coming to Hong Kong to attain his MBA from HKU and London Business School's joint program. Since 2016, Musheer has contributed extensively to building the region's fintech and virtual asset ecosystem, particularly as the co-founder and as a concurrent board member and the inaugural general manager of the FinTech Association of Hong Kong. For a time between October 22 and January 2024, Musheer served as a financial markets risk assurance lead with the Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority in Dubai. And with that, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
So let me direct my first question to you, Musheer. Constructively, what can be done to take Hong Kong startups to the next level?
Firstly, thank you for having me, and it's great to be back in the R&R podcast. And I think we did the 50th episode together. And kudos to yourself, Professor Anna, and Ross and the team for the amazing guests you have. So a privilege to be here and also to join Joshua. As you mentioned, I've been part of this, been an honor and a privilege to be part of the Hong Kong startup and fintech ecosystem for nearly a decade now, right? And we've seen various waves from 2016 to 2019, where it was that growth phase where a lot of ecosystem was growing. There were many enablers in the ecosystem, to the phase the world went through during COVID, and now post-COVID when we're seeing the green shoots. And I'm going to take a little segment in terms of contextualizing this conversation. During those time of the pandemic, I think person-to-person interaction had significantly dropped. And so that ecosystem kind of started getting very fragmented. Founders and entrepreneurs thrive in an ecosystem where they're able to connect with each other and engage with each other, bounce off ideas, find mentors, find co-founders, find investors, and find partners, right? I'm not even talking about clients, but even in the B2B environment, that's very useful because as the term goes, these are the members of your tribe who have a similar mindset, similar way of life, have sacrificed similarly and are suffering similarly and enjoy the win similarly. When we see the work that the Hong Kong government has done over the last 4 or 5 years, it's been very constructive. I am a beneficiary of the support system that was brought in during COVID, both in terms of providing, subsidies for office space, be it internships and employee subsidies, all the way to tax subsidies, which benefited a lot of the small startups. So financially, it was always there, and there were other things. The Hong Kong government has been very active in the move that they've been making, especially over the last two policy statements and in the recent past in developing and putting in capital into various initiatives, funds, and direct investment to startups. And you have the science parks and the cyberports of the world who are designated startup hubs and have their own incubation and acceleration programs, and also host hundreds of startups each. Having said that, what I feel we need to take our ecosystem to the next level and be very competitive and be an enabler for more entrepreneurs is a mechanism that can help bring this ecosystem together and increase the engagement for these startups. Number one, right? Number two is there are a variety, and which is a credit to the government and others in terms of schemes and initiatives that are there for helping startups and SMEs now in Hong Kong. However, they're not as easily accessible, or are not many people are not aware of how to do it. So I do feel we need kind of a invest in Hong Kong entity. I'm just paraphrasing as it were, but more so, Hong Kong has done a tremendous job bringing in entrepreneurs and enterprises into Hong Kong. At least in my world, with more the startup and the fintech world, I've seen Jane's team, King's team, Charles, all of them do such a great work. Alpha now leading the stuff. And with overseas, they've done great work with the Middle East trip, Southeast Asia trip. I've been part of the Middle East trips on 2 occasions. So it's been a great drive. But I feel one thing we can really build upon is bringing together an initiative, which is not about a funding initiative or an investment initiative, but more an initiative that can bring together various pieces of the government and government-supported entities, from HKPC to Cyberport, etc., an entity that can bridge any entrepreneur in Hong Kong who needs to access resources, or both in terms of physical office space, funds, all the way to mentors, etc. In one place, right? Like a coordination agency, as it were. And secondly, as an extension of that, to leverage off various startup ecosystem, which to some extent are fragmented from, the fintech associations of the world, the Web3 Hub or the Web3 Association, there's tech associations, etc. And we have a few accelerators. I wish we had more, but we have a few accelerators whom we could tie this up to as this whole binding ecosystem that is for the entrepreneurs, right? And essentially, one of our challenges in Hong Kong for the longest time has been early stage capital. We are great at the other end of it. We've had a record IPO listing, the number one in the world for this year so far, and on track to be for the rest of the year as well. Great work by HKEX to revive the markets as well. However, when we took up early stage capital, initially it was usually very difficult. We had a lot of VCs, but family offices and others tend to be more on the less risk side, slightly more mature scale-ups are getting funding, but early stage don't. So when funding is a challenge, the other way to survive is largely based on ecosystem support. So in a place like Hong Kong, where running startups is a very big life decision for people, just given the cost of living, having these other support can be a big factor, right? And that's where I feel a government-supported initiative to bring these various people initiatives together in one place would be of great help. It's a bit like what they've done with Hong Kong Inc. at a regulatory level, along with FSTB and Invest Hong Kong. We need something similar for the entrepreneurs in Hong Kong.
See, I mean, your point is well taken. Early stage funding in Hong Kong is very weak, and I'd like to hear from either or both of you as to how we might fix that. I mean, clearly the hallmark of a strong startup ecosystem is how strong the community is. Bank account access, they need government subsidies, both local and international business ties. And again, it comes down to, is the community open to it? Hong Kong can be very myopic with everyone doing their own thing. And beyond that, I think it's clear that you need investors, but you also need mentors and supportive, open-minded community. You need support systems, non-financial, but also, I think, Musheer, as you once mentioned, operational support for local startups in Hong Kong, and communication partnerships and angel investors who can coordinate. And something I think, Joshua, you once mentioned to me, this is also a question of culture and mindset, that local angel investors and mentors, I mean, the Hong Kong business environment in this sense is more Asian than Western. It's too formulaic. It's too math based. It's that for this amount of investment, this amount of time, I calculate this amount of risk. Hence, this should be my return. Not willing to take that chance, and I guess that goes into your worldview, your level of myopia, open-mindedness, and your strategy. But anyway, that's enough for me. I'd be keen to hear from both of you.
Well, I think you're right on the spot. I always take the view that having worked within the startup ecosystem myself for the past few years, I have had the first-hand experience in seeing what sort of struggles that a lot of startup companies have. Well, taking a step back, of course, we always compare Hong Kong's incubation centers, the likes of Science Park and Cyberport, with that of Silicon Valley. Most notably, several things that we look at. Why is Silicon Valley so attractive and efficient? Well, they have capital availability, client proximity, and the last step, of course, is innovation culture. The incubation centers in Hong Kong have, of course, gone a long ways in basically grooming the incubation innovation culture, creating very large campuses where they put all these entrepreneurs together. But the biggest struggle at the end of the day is still twofold. One is raising capital, and the second part is basically go to market. Because without solving these two factors, all you're doing is burning runway, and all the incubation centers being the various support they can provide is extending that runway to a limited extent. So one of the and when you mention culture, that really resonates, because in Silicon Valley, for example, the selling point there is you have access to large companies, as a large institution where you can basically list your products on in a very straightforward, established routes, because it's all within the local hub. But in Hong Kong, we have positioned ourselves as the gateway to China and the gateway to Southeast Asia. Yet this gateway into these two jurisdictions, as much as great opportunities they bring about, there's a huge issue with being, at the end of the day, it is still cross-border. So of course, it will be very useful if there's actually help in all these technology ideas, because they're great technologies all being incubated in Science Park. The question is, how do you go to market? Raising capital to extend your runway is, of course, something that works within the interim. But at the end of the day, is help basically fostering the ability for those technologies to be commercialized within the commercial realm is more important. And this is something that I'm quite hopeful that the governments as well as various parties will be working more towards.
Yeah, that would be something to look forward to. I mean, when we look at the models, you've got the private-public partnership. You got groups like W Hub. They're good at what they do, offering incubators. The universities offer incubators through their business schools, and most, if not all, the universities have grants for startups. Josh, as I recall, you once mentioned to me, the pain points in Hong Kong are that it's rich in technology and ideas, but you need a lot of people for startups to thrive, and a critical mass of consumers. They need to have a steady pool of consumers to be excited about a product launch. And then you look at incubators where you can pitch to a select community. But I have to say, from having had a little bit of a venture into this space, I was way back in 2006. I was a consultant for the Jules F. Knapp Entrepreneurship Center, which was an on-campus incubator at the Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago for startups. And it occurred to me that the companies that we had, and this is in this sense, academic innovators, academic entrepreneurs were the worst. That you will have a professor who will come up with an idea
Yes.
and just sit on it for a while. And the best, most successful companies were the outside companies that came to us for help. And another truth is, it was like this unwritten rule of nature that no matter how innovative you think what you've come up with is, there are at least 6 other companies, not infrequently within your vicinity, that have more or less come up with the same thing, but at different levels of development. I have to say, we can't just blame the institutions and the government. Our entrepreneurs need to have the gumption. They need to act with dispatch. They need to have the chutzpah. They need to have the zeal and the drive. And I don't know. I see more of that fire in other markets, but maybe I'm being too harsh on Hong Kong.
In Hong Kong, we are very East Asian, right? It's a very scholarly market. And I've worked with this tech conglomerate where we have more PhDs than I care to count within the organization. And the biggest problem when you have overemphasis on academia is that a lot of these PhDs, they will self-fantasize about how great their product is. But at the end of the day, the only people that are actually interested in the product are themselves, right? They're not going to basically play down how the product lacks application. And they quickly settle in this echo chamber, which is basically something that really stops them from going to market. So I've seen companies that have sat on ideas that they think is great for 10 years. And unfortunately, for anything that deals with technology, we have something called the technological life cycle, where if you don't commercialize it sufficiently fast enough, it might be phased out and become antiquated in the relatively near future. Of course, certain ideas do stand the test of time and can be revived. We've seen auto driving, for example. That idea actually first came about in the 1950s, uh, and uh, and really got revived when Elon Musk Tesla really went through the barriers, basically pushing it to market. But again, the key is always how do you push to market, and that's something that I think you can't just spend money or you can't just provide a campus for. It's something that is culture. It's something that you put in. Basically, you put the clients in front of those people as well. And by isolating them on these two very nice campuses, which unfortunately takes a long time for most people to travel to, it makes it very hard for them to win clients. So Science Park, for example, is in the middle of like between two places. It's 1 hour away from CBD area, but it's also quite far away from mainland China. So, and it's not attached to any MTR system. So how do you put those people, those geeks that are always eggheads in their own environment, in front of clients that know how to basically get them sold to the general population? That's the key.
Musheer?
So I think I have two viewpoints here. Science Park and Cyberport were built in large spaces. We have to be wary that if you see the size of either of them, right, or both of them, they're pretty large campuses, which probably wasn't a land parcel available at that scale and size for to be built in central Hong Kong. Having said that, I think the accessibility is improving. We have the conversation on an MTR to Cyberport in a few years' time. But these are longer term infrastructure issues. Two things on the cultural. Let's start with the cultural piece of it. And I'm talking as somebody who's been here for 11 years. I'm not a Hong Kong local, but I'm literally wedded to the Hong Kong culture in that sense. Is the fact that for many decades, right, say from late 80s, 90s onwards, Hong Kong became a services focused city, right? Made in Hong Kong was a very strong brand. Before that, we know of many warehouses and manufacturing hubs that are littered across the city, which are now converted into co-working spaces or other stuff across. But the mindset changed in terms of becoming a services industry, which meant a lot of people went professional services, and the way of making money was different. And it still is among the best paid places for legal, for finance, and a bunch of other industries. So that changed the mindset in terms of risk-taking ability, right? Having said that, I think in the last 6-7 years, there has been a very big change in that from an entrepreneur's taking risk. There's the KPMG, or I think it's KPMG into Alibaba Entrepreneurship Fund, who used to publish a survey about youth and their parents when it comes to interest in entrepreneurship. So you would see that there's a high percentage of students or young persons under 25 who want to get into building startups or working for startups, up to 80-90% of them keen, while their parents, the numbers were in 20-30% and was going up. Now when I look around, when I'm going for these founders meetups which are being revived, what you building, FinStep Asia with WLab, we've run a few founder events. There are a bunch of others who are also initiating this. I'm seeing a lot more percentage of local entrepreneurs, right, who are getting into it. So, culturally getting to take risks to build businesses, it also takes a while, right? You're risking something from a very stable position to jump into something that is completely unstable, without a guarantee of any returns and a lot of hard work, and with commitments that you have at the cost of living in Hong Kong is not easy. But we are seeing that a lot more younger people are also opting to work for startups or start building startups. So in one sense, when Josh was talking about the technical experts who may not have the business acumen or lack strong business acumen, the piece of the conversation on Cyberport and Science Park is that location is on one hand, they do make these business matching, etc. But it's also a valid point in terms of why we need a focused initiative which will help build those skills for Hong Kongers, right? Or Hong Kong entrepreneurs, be it youngsters, expats like myself and others who are coming and studying in Hong Kong and looking at the startup ecosystem, or local Hong Kongers who are now looking to come out of these mindset of services, steady jobs, who may and are maybe technically very sound, but want to understand the business elements. I think that's where this conversation for me is important, is this mentorship that can be provided, this business acumen, how to deal with clients, whom are the right places to connect. A lot of our ecosystem players aren't as active as they were before. And even with FinStep and a bunch of others you mentioned, are not very active in the local ecosystem in the recent years, largely because things changed during the pandemic and their engagement changed. And I think that's where that revival is coming back now. And it's a timely occasion for a public-private kind of partnership where a W Hub, a FinStep Asia, a Garage Society, or a Cocoon, whoever it is, can come together with the Science Park, Cyberport, and run initiatives which can happen in places which are accessible to everybody, can be rotationally in different elements, and be more structured, right? It is not a overnight story. It is not something for 3 to 5 years. It is something for 10 years, 15 years. We'll never transform into Silicon Valley, at least not in a 10, 20-year time frame, right? But we don't need to be a Silicon Valley. We don't have to be a place where everything is super innovative. That's where all the tech is made. We have Shenzhen right next door. We are renowned for being a great place to do business, for connection and business acumen. So you want to build entrepreneurs who can leverage of the tech that's being built in Shenzhen, or the Greater Bay Area is being connected, the northern metropolis is being spoken about. So those connections are happening, but we just need a lot more entrepreneurial ecosystem where people, when they're leaving cushy, well-paid jobs or a career that could lead to that, to get into entrepreneurship and hardship, can have the right support to eventually get their startups off and start making it revenue positive. So not all startups will succeed. In fact, majority will fail. But if you have the right support, you get a longer shot at it, right? And you can then leave a full paid job instead of trying to moonlight or hustle with working on your job during the daytime and evening working on your startup, right? And that's what I think is a key element we need to nurture further. And look, it's only so much that a government can do and take care of everything, right? It's Silicon Valley is not being supported by the Californian government and driven by the Californian government. It's largely being driven by VCs and tech entrepreneurs who've succeeded, done really well, and putting money back and putting their effort and time back into the ecosystem. We need a lot more of that. When I got into fintech here, many entrepreneurs in the WhatsApp group used to talk about their product, and I was learning a lot because they were so open. Now they don't have that opportunity. Maybe they've grown larger. They're not as well connected. They're doing well in their space, but that knowledge transfer, that engagement is lacking. And that's probably for me the second point, which is we need also from our entrepreneurs and the ones who have succeeded to give back more, I would say, to the younger ecosystem and try to build an ecosystem. Because if you have a thriving ecosystem, that actually enables the bigger firms also to grow and use leverage of a second rung of companies that would be good for them as well as the growth overseas.
Okay. Well, your point's well taken. I mean, and clearly, Musheer, what you're describing is whatever body exists to support startups, it needs to be something distinguished from Cyberport or Hong Kong Science and Technology Park is. I think you once put it, more of an internal invest Hong Kong with the main key performance indicator of building and sustaining the local ecosystem. And Josh, I'd like to come to you. I mean, your point about being the first to market is key. I mean, I think that's why many people in the tech space say execution matters more than perfection. We can work out the bugs in later incarnations. And to the point about antiquated PhD, people sitting on things for so long. I mean, it's almost reminiscent of a movie from the early 70s set at Harvard Law School called The Paper Chase, where one of the characters keeps adding to his property outline, and his people in his study group are saying, when are we going to get to see it? And finally, by the time exam time rolls around, his at the end of the term, the property outline ends up being longer than the actual textbook because he kept on adding to it. I mean, and it's also reminiscent of again being first putting your knowledge to use and acting on it as quickly as possible. I'm reminded of during the Cold War, you had students from Vietnam studying in Russia and India. And what did the Vietnamese students do? They studied agriculture, they studied agronomics, horticulture. They put their knowledge and they put it back into the farms and they increased their yields. And what did the Indian and the Russian graduates do? They wanted to get master's degrees and PhDs. And so one time the Indians were bragging, we increased our yield by fivefold, by tenfold. And then the Vietnamese said, really? We increased our yields by 20-fold, by 30-fold. Again, it does seem to me that people forget you learn through execution. Put it into practice as quickly as possible. That's something our entrepreneurs need to learn. But I mean, I guess it ultimately comes down to strategy. And something I'd like to put to both of you is: do you think private enterprises can come together with government to create better, more efficient, efficacious, and high achieving business strategies?
Well, I think Musheer actually brought up a very good point. There's an old saying, jack of all trades, expert in none. Musheer said we don't really need to be Silicon Valley because we have Shenzhen right across the border. And in Hong Kong, I feel that so far the attention have been really drawn all over the place. We have two incubation center as if we're trying to become Silicon Valley with a lot of innovation of our own. And at the same time, what Hong Kong is really known for is being a financial center, which is basically New York City in the US. So when our attention is drawn, are we trying to become Silicon Valley on the West Coast, or are we trying to become the financial capital in the East Coast? And that has really driven across a lot of our attention in this respect, where we haven't been able to focus on what we are. Keeping in mind, even the Silicon Valley in China is struggling to get capital. They come to Hong Kong for fundraising because when you talk about foreign direct investment, a lot of foreign VC funds and capital firms will not be comfortable having the assets or having the liquidity directly injected into the mainland market. Hong Kong is unique in that the reputation and the rule of law, the common law tradition, all that really attracts why Hong Kong is one of what we call one of the tier one financial centers across the globe. It used to be the talk of everyone that it's either London, New York, or Hong Kong. The other cities don't even make it to the top 3 list, right? And should Hong Kong be focusing what they are really specializing in? So are we actually, our infrastructure more geared towards creating a Silicon Valley type of environment, or are we geared more towards helping Silicon Valley companies raise funds internationally because we attract liquidity internationally speaking? And right now, just look at this first half of this year. We have some of the world's largest IPO going down in history in Hong Kong. So is it a time for us to choose which path we should be heading towards so that the entire roadmap for this entire region can be more properly articulated and read out? So it's actually a soul-searching exercise, I would think, that in order to basically get to where everyone wants to get to, we need to know what our focus, what our core competencies are, and really drill in on those.
Musheer?
I concur in the sense. So there are a few strengths we have: financial services, trade, retail to a certain extent. In fact, even gourmet, if I may say so, we have one of the highest number of Michelin star restaurants in the world, right? Per capita. So there are various elements of Hong Kong and brand Hong Kong, which has been great. And I'm trying to be narrow in my focus. I have a lot of views on brand Hong Kong and how we should be leveraging more and talking more about how great the city is, from its stunning beaches to its mountains to its great people, food, culture, everything else. But talking about the entrepreneurship world, I think that's the key is a bringing together private-public partnership, I think, is the way forward. If we look at the Hong Kong Web3 blueprint, which we came out with a few weeks back, task force from the Web3 Harbor, where we looked at various initiatives that can be driven both by private enterprises in conjunction with government policy, right? So it has been an approach of Hong Kong government previously, which was industry-led, government-supported, and which has worked very well in the past. Now it's a matter of being together, driving these things together, and more engagement as partners, right, as equal stakeholders. And I feel we've now reached a stage where we have multiple unicorns, some of them who graduated to becoming listed companies, right? And their founders, the entrepreneurs who are building, the Florians of the world from Evident and all the others, they are actually people who are very good to talk to, are great mentors, and would be very valuable for young entrepreneurs to learn from. But that's one piece of it, right? Understanding the business world, etc. But also about just building businesses, having the right resources, right access, right? So there's the government support from an agency perspective can be bringing together all of these different, in a sense, I would say fragmented various pieces of resources that the government is supporting and providing at one place for access. Hong Kong PC does a bit of that, but really, like, it needs to be an outward push rather than people coming to it. It has to be, what can we do for you? How can we help you? Right, going out to the entrepreneurs and building that culture and momentum to change that attitude and culture for those who are not used to entrepreneurship. And when you see that support, right, you are more, I wouldn't say at ease, but it calms you down a bit more, right? You're less stressed because you are seeing the right support and you know the right places to go to, because hours, if not days and weeks, can be spent on just trying to find a bank account and the right program to submit your product or your POC to, right? Finding the right business line,
Oh,
how to
totally.
go about
Yeah, yeah.
things. Okay. Yeah. So
Something gets
that's,
stuck in the bureaucratic rigmarole.
yeah, but it's just because it's just down to not knowing the right options and going all around, right? That's one part. The second piece, as I said, bringing the entrepreneurs together to help build companies, right? How we've mastered the art of structuring deals in Hong Kong, right? We know every possible way there's a talent available in Hong Kong which knows how to structure a deal for capital, for trade, to go into mainland, out of mainland, in Asia, right? And that's why we are masters at it. And that's why we've been good at DLT and other things, because we understand fundamentally how to structure. And we will do very well in the institutional DLT world and blockchain world. In a similar way, right? Being able to get the entrepreneurs to understand how startups are run, because it's not so native, but building businesses is in the blood of a lot of Hong Kongers, right? From Superman Lee all the way to everybody else who runs small shops here. People understand business. And so I feel just bringing that knowledge of the new economy founders to help the next stage of founders is also going to be vital. So it's a combination from, you can say, resources support in terms of just where it is, how to access it, bringing people together from a government agency-led side. On the other side would be ecosystem associations, etc., and founders being brought together to help on the soft skill side, if I may say so.
It occurs to me that if we look at the existing structure of what we've got, Cyberport, Invest Hong Kong, Science Park, Trade Development Council, I mean, without being overly critical of what's come before and past government actions, and yes, mistakes have been made and hopefully lessons have been learned, but I've often wondered what would genuinely be needed to create a proper standalone startup support entity. And it always struck me, it wasn't, I don't know if it was about resources. It was more about will, and that's what was holding up the deployment of such resources. But I mean, obviously there's some things that are just so glaringly obvious that when you look at Cyberport and Science Park, I mean, Josh, you raised this, they could clearly use better transportation. They're so far away and out of the way. And of course, yeah, downtown real estate is at a premium in this town, but they're so out of the way that they could use better transportation. And the other point about, they've got great facilities, and they help bring innovative companies together. But what's needed is more facilitation of commercialization.
Yes, well, the local politics in play, right? We know from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, the reason why there's no MTR stop going all the way to Cyberport, for example, is because local residents objected to having a line there. It erodes
So
premium.
we've got our own NIMBYism right here, even in this modern progressive society.
Yeah, exactly. And same thing with Science Park. There have been talk about years of connecting the MTR line that it runs literally in parallel, but it's really ridiculous that you have to take a short stop that goes on the bus going to the Science Park area. I worked there for 2 years. It's so inconvenient. On the surface, it seems like something that is a jerry-rigged solution, but it's not something that's meant to be permanent. And yet, despite the fact that Science Park have been in existence for decades, right? That issue has not been solved. And we have seen firsthand what such mentality does to ecosystems. Look at California. For example, California has been like 20 years ago, Silicon Valley, all the tech companies love to be based there. But fast forward to today, because of skyrocketing real estate, again, with all those existing homeowners, don't want any action that will erode their house real estate prices, right? They don't want to increase the supply of houses in California because that might diminish their their property value, and as a
Right,
result, all these create
zoning ordinances, which prompted them to move to Austin. Though there's a clip from CNBC I'll send you. A
yes,
lot of companies are moving back from Austin back to California. That despite the shortcomings of California, you cannot replace this core nexus of people and brilliance and capital. Very hard to recreate.
absolutely, of course. So basically, it's I think every single civil administration will have this issue to tackle. How do you solve these problems in order to achieve equilibrium where you can balance the various interests? And that's the art of governing, of course. And I don't think on the planet there has been any government that's exceptional. We live in a very good, prosperous time, of course, but there's always room for improvement, right? There will always be people that will be having dissenting feelings about how things are run and they're suboptimal. So this is again what you look at. But I think one of the other things that we can look at is Hong Kong has actually managed to win the crown of various angles for many times in the history. It started off as a port city, and that's why we're reminiscent of our history of exporting things, even though I don't think Hong Kong is really exporting that much industry. We don't have factory districts, for example. It was once one of the three largest liquidity markets on the world. And now we are trying to basically build on the proud history that it has. It has many beautiful pearls. So again, going into the future, it really is up to the next generation to see how they would want to basically preserve as well as advance the reputation of Hong Kong going forward so that we can achieve even more together.
Ajay, when you mentioned about people returning from Austin as an example of ecosystem, I come from Bangalore, right? Born and raised. So I've seen it from the 80s all the way till when Infosys and TCS and Wipro built that city into an IT hub to the last decade or early 2010s when we became a real startup hub. If you're talking about a chaotic city, my city, as much as I love it to bits, is chaotic. It's renowned for its traffic snarls where people take 2 hours to go from I mean, this is a fact, right? There's a joke where they say, oh, friend was leaving from one of the IT parks in south of Bangalore, and another friend was leaving from Hong Kong on a flight to Bangalore. The friend from Hong Kong is already reached home in Bangalore, while the friend from the IT park is still on a flyover, right? But
that town, Bangalore, it's so paradoxical. It's
Is.
so relaxing. If you don't have to go to work, you don't have to spend much time on the roads. It is a wonderful town.
Used to be known as a pensioner's paradise a couple of decades ago.
Yeah.
But what I'm implying there is, and the government's working hard there as well, and there's a lot of things. But the IT parks there as well were on other sides of the world. Right? It wasn't on the center of the city, despite space being there. And people's commute an hour and a half, 2 hours in traffic, one way. I'm talking about. So with Hong Kong's public transport, it's a bit tedious to get to some of these places, Science Park and Cyberport, but not as challenging. But the reason Bangalore hasn't lost its shine, there've been a bunch of other cities where there's extremely good talent and development and have been growing, and Indian economy is growing, so that supports them. But no one's been able to take the crown of the IT startup hub, IT and startup hub from Bangalore, largely because of that talent, right? That ecosystem. Alex Caleb has been doing the rounds on Twitter, where he's been going into these homes in Bangalore, which are like literally hacker houses, because there are a half a dozen to a dozen young people who have rented the house out, and all they're doing is sitting and coding and building and developing stuff, right? And it's a normal conversation when you're sitting in a coffee shop in Hong Kong, where 50% of the people are probably from a startup, and 25% of the conversation is about an acquisition or an investment in a startup, right? Or what somebody else is doing. It's just very, very normal for us when we're there in town. So that actually makes a big difference. There's always in a gathering now, if I go back home, I'll always have, there's a friend who'll be a VC, there'll be a friend who's an ex-startup founder, there's a friend who's a startup founder, and then there is somebody who's a corporate who's a client, and and somebody who's building something new, right, and ideating. So that makes a big difference when it's highly acceptable in the ecosystem. And that is what we need to build, is that enablement of an ecosystem, that mindset, right? And that helps when we have people coming together, seeing success stories. All of this is which plays. This is not about investing money, it's about investing human resources, if I may use that term, right? And enablers to change and take us to the next step. We are among the top innovation hubs, top 10, top 20 in whichever different metrics. So we are there. And at times we are hard on Hong Kong because we expect us to be there in top 3 of almost everything that is worth competing for, and which is a great mentality to have, because it's a winner mentality, right? But there's, we can go a little soft on us because we're not that bad as compared to a lot of other places, but we want to move up in our startup ecosystem. And I think this is a way of just bringing the entrepreneurs more together and enabling that and finding people who can do that without having to spend much. It is about convincing these founders about the value of this and bringing them to the room, essentially.
If you never aim for the stars, you might never reach the moon, is how that expression goes. So that's where we'll have to leave it. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. And looking forward to the Hong Kong Bahunia blossoming even more. Thanks.
Likewise. And to our listeners, thank you. Until next time.